Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a book haul revisit for the month of February. This is where I look back at previous book hauls from this month and see how many of the books that I brought into my library I have read, which ones I might need to consider letting go of, and which ones I would still like to get to. It's my way of holding myself accountable for the books that I bring into my library, as well as a way of trying to get acquainted with how I read and how I purchase books, and maybe do a little bit better about knowing what I'm likely to read in the future. That's how I look at these, and hopefully they're entertaining for you as well watching. The book haul from February of 2020 is fairly small, and then the one from February of 2021 is a little bit larger. We'll get into that. I'm glad that both of them are kind of small because I have a couple of months in the past where there are really large book hauls. These are smaller, and I'm hoping that I'm going to have smaller book hauls going forward, so they kind of fit in with that level of intention that I have. The success rate is going to be a bit of a mess for both of them, but we'll get into that. So we're going to start with my February of 2020 book haul. Before we begin, I should mention I will not really talk about the plots of the books that I'm going to mention. If you are interested in those, I will put links to the original book haul videos in the description box down below. You can check those out for more information about the plot of the book if you'd like to gauge whether or not it would be interesting for you. In my book haul videos, I also try to do a little bit of the opening of the book to give you a sense of that. In older book haul videos, I only read the first sentence and that was it. And recently I've been kind of getting away from that. But if you'd like all of that information, check out the actual book haul video, because I'm going to try not to spend a whole lot of time talking about the plot of these books. You've been warned. We're going to start with February of 2020. There were 4 books in that book haul. The first one is a volume of poetry, which is a rare thing for me to haul. It's My Alexandria, Poems by Mark Doty. I purchased this because I had set a challenge for myself in 2020 to read outside of my comfort zone. And one of the areas I really wanted to hit was poetry. I had asked for a lot of recommendations, and My Alexandria was something that was recommended by a couple of different people. And because it kind of aligns with my interests as a reader anyway, it is an LGBTQ novel. It deals with AIDS and HIV. I believe it was published in the early 90s. Let me check. Published in 1993. So it aligned with my reading, and it seemed like a natural fit for my reading list for that year, and I did end up reading it. It's only small, so it wasn't a difficulty to do. It's only 89 pages. I really liked it. This was a good success for me delving into an area that I don't usually read, an area that I am usually intimidated to try. I'm always worried that I'm not going to understand poetry and that it will make me feel like an idiot. So I tend to stay away. This was a really good success story. I didn't get any other volumes of poetry in the year 2020. I did get another one in last year, 2021, and it was not as successful as this one. So I would recommend it. I thought it was a really great read, and I would actually love to read other books of Mark Doty's. So definitely this one is a success story, and unfortunately it's going to be a rare success story for this book haul revisit. The next one that I brought into my library in February of 2020 was The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby. I meant to look up if it's Dare or Daré. I'm just going to say Abby Dare, and I apologize if that's incorrect. I was really excited to read this book in February of 2020, and I have not gotten to it. And now I confess my urgency has kind of died down. I have other books on my plate that I'm hoping to get to. So this one is something I'm flirting with the idea of an unhaul. If you have feedback about it, please let me know in the comment section down below, because I'm wondering if this should continue to take up space in my library, and if I'm ever going to get around to it, since it's taken 2 years. And as I said, the urgency has kind of died down on whether or not I will get to it. So please let me know what you think of this book in the comment section down below, if you think it's something worth keeping around and trying to get to. The next 2 books from my February of 2020 book haul were part of this Vintage Japan series that I was really enamored with at the beginning of 2020, because they're just really pretty books. The first one is The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by it only mentions the last name of the author on the front. I just want to make sure I have it correct. Yukio Mishima. That's what I thought it was, but I just wanted to make sure. This is sort of a classic novel, only a small little thing, itty bitty. You could dunk it in your coffee, and yet I haven't gotten around to it. But it's a really pretty edition of this book. I think all of the Vintage Japan editions from Vintage, of course, are just really staggeringly pretty, and I'm happy to have this on my shelf. This is more of a library builder in my defense. It wasn't something I was looking to get to right away. I did have a thought that because 2020 was my now infamous, in my mind, Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge, which I made way more complicated than it should have been. I was thinking that I wanted to read an author from every continent, and obviously I would need authors from Asia, which is part of why this Vintage Japan series had really appealed to me then. But while I had a notion that I might get to them in 2020, I didn't have a sense of urgency. There were lots of other options to meet that prompt or idea for a prompt. So these were just things that I kind of wanted to have on my shelf so that if I was ever in the mood or inspired enough to read them, that they would be there. And that is kind of what this is, and that is what this will continue to be. I have no desire to get rid of it because I think I would be interested in reading this someday at some point. Again, it's only small. Let's see how many pages it is. It is 131 pages, so that should be doable. Maybe if I haven't gotten to it by November, I can do it for like novellas in November. That would be a fun thing. I actually only just noticed that on the spine, I don't know if you can see it, there are legs diving into the ocean. That's even more fun. So yes, this will be around. I will continue to have it in my library. I don't have any sense of urgency to get to it. I just would like to do it someday, at some point. The other book, which is the final book from my February 2020 book haul, is much bigger. That one's itty bitty. This one's a brick. It's the Makioka sisters. And again, the author's name is not here. I think it's Junichirō Tanizaki. So same deal, although much, much larger in size. Gorgeous edition of this book. There were other editions that were available in the United States. All of these Vintage Japan books were only available in the UK, and I ordered them from the UK. There were editions that were American and available here, but I really wanted the pretty one from Japan, or from the UK, from the Vintage Japan series. I've heard really, really good things about this book in particular. I can't remember from where because it's been about 2 years now, but I haven't gotten around to it. It looks like it's about 562 pages. So yes, quite the opposite of the other one we talked about. And I would still really like to get to it. Same deal. It was a library builder. If I had gotten to it in 2020, it would have fit with the Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge that I was doing. I didn't get to it, and that's fine. I would like to keep it on my shelf, so I will get to it someday. Like I said, I have heard really good things about this book. So I am still very much looking forward to getting to it. And if you have thoughts on any of these February 2020 book hauls, books, I would love to hear it because, again, my only success story is my Alexandria. 1 out of 4. That's not great. But of the other 3, 2 of them I would call library builders, and I'm not in any sense of urgency to get rid of them. I mean, they're pretty, if nothing else, but also books I would like to get to and have no plan to get to anytime soon. So those are definites because I really liked my Alexandria and it will continue to live on my shelf. This is the one that I'm wondering about. I think if it's still on my shelf, February 2023, it's gone. Right now, I think it's The Last Chance Saloon. And if you have thoughts about whether or not I should get to it, or if the audio might be a good option, let me know in the comment section down below. So again, to recap February 2020, 4 books were hauled. I only read 1. There are no unhauls right now, but another 1 is sort of on the cusp of being unhauled. And I need your feedback on that one if you would like to save it. But if you would like to save it, please show your work in the comment section down below. And let's move to the February 2021 book haul, which is larger. It has 7 books, but not too large, not like unwieldy. The first one that I hauled in February of 2021 was The Last Picture Show by Larry McMurtry. This sort of fun vintage-ish edition of it was available at my local used bookstore for $3.25. So I don't feel like I am wasting any money keeping it on my shelf, and it is something I would like to get to. I really liked Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, and I would like to read more of his books. This is the one that I would probably like to prioritize next. I do have another one on my shelf, but this is the one that I would really like to get to. I think Lonesome Dove and The Last Picture Show are probably the ones that he is most known for. This one is a little bit eclipsed by the film version from 1971 that was nominated for a lot of Oscars and is considered a classic. But both Lonesome Dove and The Last Picture Show deal with the mythos around the Old West, but in very different ways. Lonesome Dove plays with the genre conventions of a Western. The Last Picture Show is a book that is set in the 1900s and is set in a dying Texan town. So I'd really like to get to it at some point. This, again, was a library builder. I just grabbed it because there was this fun vintage-ish edition. I am a fan of vintage-y looks in books, and that really appealed to me, but also I would really like to get to another Larry McMurtry book at some point. So this will not be going anywhere. I'd like to get to it. The next one was something that I saw on Jen the Librarian's channel, This Brutal House by Niven Govinden. It was not available in the United States. I don't think that's changed over the last year. But when Jen was talking about it, I was immediately intrigued and ordered a copy from the UK, and here it is. What's really funny about that is I ordered it, and almost immediately, once it arrived, Jen did a video talking about how she started it, wasn't quite liking it, and bailed. Oh well, maybe I'll like it more than she did. The subject sounds really interesting, and again, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the plot descriptions of books. I know I kind of went there a little bit with The Last Picture Show. This is set in the drag ball scene of the 1980s, and I've heard it compared to the TV show Pose. So it still is very interesting to me. The urgency has died down. The urgency kind of deflated once I found out that Jen ultimately bailed on the book, but I still want to get to it. This is something that could be an option for my pile of possibilities for Pride Month, but since my pile of possibilities for Pride Month is looking stacked, it could very well get bumped off. I would still like to read it. The urgency is a little bit gone, but I would still like to read it. So it's not going anywhere. And because it is an LGBTQ story and something that I would like to get to, and there's no time limit on my interest in this book, that will make it appealing for a long time. So I'd like to get to it at some point. It's not in any danger of an unhaul right now, at least. Even if it's still here next year, I don't think it would be like Last Chance Saloon, like I'm saying with The Girl with the Louding Voice, because the subject matter particularly appeals to my interest as a reader. The next one was one of my most anticipated books of 2021, The Inland Sea by Madeleine Watts. I ultimately did not get to it. I'll link my most anticipated books of 2021 down below if you'd like to check it out. So I ultimately did not get to this. It is by an Australian author, and I ended up doing a different book for Aussie April last year. It was The Yield, which I did as a buddy read with Sean the Book Maniac, and which was ultimately one of my favorite reads of last year. So even though it was one of my most anticipated books, I ended up not getting to it. I will say that the sense of urgency to read it has died down a lot. I would still like to get to it. I'm still very interested in the story. And again, I'm not really going to get into the plot. So if you're interested in that, check out the original book haul in the description box down below. But I am still looking forward to it. If it's still here and unread in February of 2023, then we might start having a conversation about whether or not it'll be time. But right now, I'm fine holding on to it because I am still interested in it and I would still like to get to it. This seems like a natural fit for this year's Aussie April because I don't have any other plans for what I will do that month. So I am hoping that I will get to it then. We'll see how that goes. The next one is another brick of a book. It's Mike Nichols' A Life by Mark Harris. I actually was thinking when I first bought this about how likely I was to get to it before it was in paperback, and whether or not I would read it in print, and whether or not I would read it on audio. And back then and now, I think I am more likely to do this on audio. The reason I got a copy of the book is that Mark Harris is one of my favorite journalists. He used to write for Entertainment Weekly, back when Entertainment Weekly was a really great magazine, and I was obsessed with it. And he ultimately left. Kind of does freelance work. He's actually married to Tony Kushner, which is interesting. Doesn't define him, but it's really interesting. And this book kind of grew out of Pictures at a Revolution, which is another book that he wrote. I believe it was actually his first book. And I love that book. It's one of my favorites. If you know me, you know that I am kind of obsessed with Hollywood and the Oscars and things like that. So he wrote a book about the change in Hollywood, the drastic sea change from the old studio method to the way it is now, and the transition from the more codified, restricted cinema that came with the studio system to the sort of more revolutionary cinema that you saw in the 1970s. And one of the movies that he talked about in that book, because he did that by examining the 5 Best Picture nominees in 1968, one of which was The Graduate, directed by Mike Nichols. In doing research for that segment of the book, he really became fascinated with Mike Nichols. And I'm talking a lot about the premise of this book, but I think this should explain why I wanted to make sure I had a copy of this book and why I'm fine keeping it on my shelf, even though I am thinking that when I get around to this book, which I don't have any urgency to do because I'm not a huge Mike Nichols fan, but I'm interested based on what I know from Pictures at a Revolution, I'm fine keeping it. Long story short, because I like Mark Harris a lot. If you don't follow Mark Harris on Twitter, I know there are a lot of Mark Harrises out there. His is, I think, at Mark Harris NYC. If that's not correct, I'll put it down here, but I believe that's what it is. He's a great Twitter follow. He's a great personality, and I'm totally fine supporting him. This was mostly a measure to support him and his publisher for putting stories like this out. And I've heard really great things about it. So that will continue to be on my shelf for those reasons. I mean, is that fair? I don't know, just because I like the author, but I think that's a reason. I think that's a good reason. One that I'm much less certain about is Girl A by Abigail Dean. This seemed like a good idea at the time because it was listed with the Book of the Month options. And I used to like to have mystery thriller options on hand so that if I was in the mood for one, or if I needed sort of a palate cleanser before moving to a more serious book, they'd be there. But I don't read a lot of mystery thrillers anymore. So I wonder how long this is going to sit there. It sounded interesting. And again, I'm not going to really go into the plot, but it sounded interesting. So this one is something I'm thinking about for an unhaul too. So here I go again, asking you, if you think it's worth holding on to this one and getting to it, let me know and show your work in the comment section down below, because I think it sounds interesting, but am I ever going to get to it? And is this space that I could be offering to something else on my shelves? Because my shelves are really crowded right now. So let me know what you think down there. I think if this is still on my shelf in February of 2023 and I have not read it, it's probably going to go. And that's just going to be the way it is. But if you want to save it for now, let me know what you think of it. The next one, finally, another success story. The Bad Muslim Discount by Syed M. Masood, which is or was one of my favorite reads from 2021. I will put a link to that video in the description box down below. I loved this book. It was also one of my most anticipated books of 2021, but unlike The Inland Sea, I actually got around to reading this one. Although I ended up listening to it on audio, I loved it. Really great book. Again, one of my favorite reads from last year. Something I hope more people will discover and try out. It's probably coming out in paperback at some point soon, if it's not already. So think about that. The next one, the final one, is a complicated story. It's almost a success, but it's not. It's Infinite Country by Patricia Engel. The reason I say that this is almost a success is that I started listening to this on audio somewhere around March or April, and I ended up putting it to the side for two reasons. First, I really liked the writing in this book. I really liked it. And because I was really liking it, I wanted to stop the audio and pick it up in book form. And it's not a very long book, so that seemed very doable at the time. It is 191 pages. The other thing that happened is I think it must have been March of last year, I was participating in the BookTube prize, and a lot of the books that I needed to read for that got pushed back, and I had to start doing some of them on audio because they just weren't available until March. So I had to crunch to fit them all in, which means that I had to push this to the side to focus on the BookTube prize, and then I never got back to it. So unfortunately, it ended up being a DNF, but not a planned DNF. And it is something I really want to get back to and finish. So I'm probably going to try to do it in print form since I thought the writing was fantastic. So this will be something I'll finish. When, I don't know. And until I do, I'm happy keeping it on my shelf because, again, the audio was so good that I really wanted to spend more time with the language of the book. So of February 2021's 7 books that I brought into my library, I read 1.5. And I would like to finish that other half and make it 2 out of 7. But we'll see how that goes. There are no unhauls, but Girl A is on the cusp. So let me know what you think and if I should hold on to that one in the comment section down below. There is one DNF, but I put an asterisk on it because that's Infinite Country. And like I said, I didn't actually want to put that book down. Circumstances kind of got in the way. And that's actually something that happens to me. A lot of the time, if I put a book down to do something else, even if I intend to immediately get back to that book, the interruption ends up being really sustained over time. So in total, of the 11 books that I have brought into my library over the last 2 Februaries, I have read 2.5. And that's not great. But there are some library builders in here and some things that I'm happy to have in my library until I get around to them, so that's not bad. There have been no unhauls so far, but there are 2 books that I'm seriously considering unhauling. And again, they are The Girl with the Louding Voice and Girl A, both books with girl in the title, I just realized. So let me know what you think of them and if they're worth hanging on to in the comment section down below. I will leave it at that for now. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.